Welcome to Insights as a Service, the podcast that helps MSPs get ahead. And this week we are doing that by helping you learn about effective leadership, how to create effective leaders within your organization, what makes a good leader, and the options you have to go about converting people who may be a little rough around the edges into really effective leaders. There's never been a more important time for us to create pathways for people, particularly as the skills shortage across New Zealand and Australia continues to bite. So this week, I'm speaking with Amanda Russo, who is a leadership coach at Russo Consulting, to figure out how all of that happens. Amanda, good morning.
Thank you, Brendan. Nice to see you today.
Likewise. We've caught up many times over the past 12 months, first time on a podcast. So welcome.
My first time on a podcast ever.
Okay, well, we'll go easy. So look, there's a number of things I want to talk about today. With your experience as a leadership coach, the companies and the people that you've worked with, for me, there's a really interesting piece in the need to invest in effective leadership in your organization to enable businesses to scale, to grow for founders and managers to take a more strategic approach, and the investment in leadership, what that allows you to achieve. I want to talk about self-awareness being a challenge, certainly something I struggled with, the need to invest in your leaders generally, but also how psychology plays a part in what you do as well. So before I jump into all of that, hit you with a million questions, let's just start with a bit of a general intro from you and what you do and how you got to that point.
Cool. Okay. So I have a history in corporate HR. So I did 20 odd years in corporate HR, mostly in the employment relations space. So a lot of working alongside managers, helping them to manage challenging employment relationships, helping people to upskill. It's a part of the employment relationship that I've really enjoyed being part of. About 5 or 6 years ago, I decided to pivot and move more into the coaching space. So I did a couple of years study through the Neuro Leadership Group and became qualified as a brain-based coach. So it's grounded in neuroscience. And then I was looking for a tool to help me diagnose, I guess, where people are at in their development on their journey as leaders. And I came across the Leadership Circle. And to my mind, after 20 odd years in HR, working with a lot of diagnostic tools, I think the Leadership Circle has a huge amount to offer leaders. And it's a very powerful tool that helps you get breakthrough very, very quickly. So I became accredited in the Leadership Circle about 4 years ago, and have been working with that ever since. So my business, I've been in business about 6 years now, and I did start with a blend of human resources and leadership coaching. But over the last few years, I've really started to focus on the leadership coaching space.
Nice. I'm super keen to dive into that whole 360 review process. I've been through it with you and found it just hugely helpful and certainly a bit of a game changer. But I'll come back to that after we sort of dive into, I guess, the concept of leadership coaching and upskilling. In your experience, who or what type of businesses get you involved and see value in upskilling people within the business to be more effective leaders?
Look, it is across industries. I have, in my human resources life, I have worked in professional services in more than one professional service environment. So I do quite a lot of work with lawyers, accountants, engineers. So that professional services environment where, as people progress in their career, they then get given people to take care of. So they become subject matter experts and very proficient as individual contributors, and then suddenly they're in leadership roles without the support to be able to do that effectively. So I do a lot of work in that space, but equally I work across a lot of industries. I work in retail and education, in the IT space, and the thing about leadership too is that leadership is universal. So it's applicable across any of the industries. And it's about, I do sometimes get some pushback that in our industry it's a little bit different, whereas leadership is leadership, and it's about our behaviours and how we show up for the people that we're leading. And so it is very like what I do can sit into any industry really.
Look, I think you can, a certain type of business, you have to have a certain culture within a business for the people running it or the person who owns it to understand that leadership skills, people skills are important? Do you find sometimes that you're only working with people who already get it, who already get the importance of leadership skills, or do you find that sometimes maybe there's a problem that needs solving, and you're engaged in that way, and that leads to a bit of a aha kind of a light bulb moment for the
Yeah,
people
look,
within the business?
I get a mix of both, to be honest. And there are some industries in particular where there's not strong leadership at the top, and I get brought in to grow leadership at that next layer. And what I tend to find in those sorts of environments is I'm giving feedback to people for the first time. They've never heard it from their own leaders. So it's quite a challenging environment to be in, where you're helping grow and develop the next layer of leaders where they don't have the role model sitting above them as well. And equally, I spend time with some businesses where we have outstanding leaders, or leaders who are striving to be better leaders and can see the value in investing in it in their own people. And then you might get some people in the business who don't see that value themselves. And there can be people who I would term as uncoachable. So they're not willing to examine the feedback that comes through. They're not willing to be curious and open to change. And that's a really difficult dynamic to work with. Um, and at times I do get brought in as a bit of a troubleshooter, and at other times it's around supporting people who are progressing in their career, and just to provide them with some support as they progress upwards in their career as well.
So, how important is self-awareness in a good leader?
Look, I don't think I think it's very challenging to change without self-awareness. And I think what the beauty of a 360 process is, that for those that have very little self-awareness, it can provide the aha for people. And so what I often see, so with the 360 I do, we have our own, we we report on our own, and then the people around us report on us. And so what we often see is a disconnect around how people have assessed themselves and how others are actually perceiving them in the business. And I think that provides a really nice aha for people, where they say, hey, my intent was this, but people are feeling it or perceiving it in a very different way. And if we've got some openness and some curiosity around that, then we can start to get some change going. But it does take a certain amount of openness and courage to be able to examine that as well.
Okay. So, last question before we jump into that 360 process, because yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot to that. In your view, what are some of the key, I guess, factors or attributes that go into making someone an effective leader?
Look, I think the linchpin of really effective leadership is authenticity and courage. So being able to really show up as your true, authentic self, and to lead from that space. And I think that what sits around that is our ability to connect with people and form connections with people, and help and guide people to be their best selves. Um, Creating a safe space for people to learn and grow and develop, and to fail. So we learn so much when we do fail, and to make that an okay thing to happen in your organization, and to create that learning space is so important. And I think, on the other side, we then have been able to create a clear strategic direction, to be able to tell the story and create the connection with the people and the strategy, so people feel that they're part of something, and all moving in the same direction.
Mm.
And I think, you can't do any of those things without being really authentic and having courage to show up as a leader.
Yeah, it's super true. The creating those connections where you get people wanting to come with you on the journey, the strategic vision that you're setting or the purpose you're creating within the business. But for me, I used to think there was kind of a me at work and a me at home, and that I could kind of turn up to work and be my work self. But you end up losing that authenticity, because you're not really you. You kind of throw on sort of a veil over the parts that you think might not be desirable. You probably accentuate some parts that probably aren't great as well, but you just don't come across as real. I mean, it's kind of a tricky space, that between the professional and the personal, and understanding how much the two interrelate. But that's been a sort of a big learning for me.
Mm. And I think, like, as a Gen Xer myself, we were always taught, check your personal life at the door. Like, no one
Mm.
wants to know about who you are as a person. You're here to work. And I think, we've got a lot of Gen Xers who are in leadership roles as well, and have that expectation of the younger people coming into the workplace. And that doesn't work. You can't decouple who you are at home and who you are at work. So it's about bringing your whole self into that workplace without oversharing. And I think that's where people stumble somewhat. They're like, well, what is the line between showing up as my authentic self and oversharing? And, there is a line, and being authentic and being vulnerable and having courage is not about oversharing and being over emotional with people in the workplace. It's about being who you truly are and leaning into that.
Which, from a sales perspective, coming from a sales background myself, that's by being yourself, by being likable, hopefully, and hanging out with people that you either want to do business with or want to do more business with. You are yourself. It's often in a social setting. You're a bit more relaxed, and that's where you do your best work. Then you come back into the office or remote office, whatever it might be, working from home. If you shut up shop then and kind of put on this different persona, you kind of end up running rings around yourself a little bit, kind of being different things for different people, and can get awfully hard to keep a track of. But anyway, let's talk about the 360 review. You've already referenced it a couple of times. It's a key part of what you do. I've been through the process, so I've got opinions. They're all good ones, but spoiler, I guess. But yeah, run us through, how it works and what it serves to accomplish.
Okay. All right. So, as I said, I work with the leadership circle, and I do feel that their leadership circle profile is the best in the market, on a global stage, actually. And what it does is it really taps into how people are perceiving you in the workplace. So the process for that is to, there are 5 groups that we look at through the 360 process. So we look at boss's boss, peers, direct reports, and then others within an organization that you interact with. So you get really, really good coverage of the people around you, and then you have your self-assessment that sits with that as well. And with the leadership circle, the more evaluators, the better. So it really does allow people to get out there and ask people to fill in the survey for them, and get a really good sense of how they're being perceived in the workplace. So a survey goes out there. It takes about 25 minutes to complete online. It's very thorough, and it goes through, it asks questions in all sorts of different ways around leadership behaviours that we've seen show up. Some are going to lead to more effective leadership, and some are going to detract from our ability to be effective as leaders. And what the leadership circle does when they pull it all together is they display it in a lovely circle, that is simple to look at, but is really rich in what it gives us. And it shows us how people are perceiving us in the workplace, and then how we are perceiving ourselves in the workplace. And so we can have a look at how we've responded for ourselves, and also how people have responded about us. And there's some real richness in it, and it allows, as allows for a good 12 months worth of coaching grounded in that leadership circle.
Well, when you're as broken as I am, you need 12 months. Maybe for others, it might be a bit quicker, but yeah.
Not at all, Brendan.
She says, lying. For me, it was really interesting. That sort of, from memory, it's a pretty solid black line where you think you sit, whether it's, an empathy or ambition or, whichever. And actually, what are the other ones? You got to remind me now. You've got you got your sort of like relationship things. You've got your sort of work ethic and sort of professional elements. What else is there?
So we have what we call our creative competencies, and what we know about the creative competencies is that they are correlated with leadership effectiveness, and then that flows on to business performance. And all the research that the leadership circle have done continually proves that the more effective we are as leaders, the more successful we're going to be as a business. And they've got brilliant white papers that illustrate that are readily available for people to have a look at. And so when they look at what we call the creative competencies, they're broken down into what have we got? Five different dimensions. So the first one is around relating, and that is all about how we as leaders relate to people. So do we form a caring connection with people? Are we fostering team play? Are we collaborating across the organisation? Do we mentor and develop people? And do we have that interpersonal intelligence to be able to do that well? So that all fits into that relating dimension. Then we move into self-awareness. And that looks at, are we self-aware as leaders? Are we selfless as leaders? And selfless leadership is all about wanting to tap into the potential that our people have. So it's not about how do I get ahead, it's about how do we all get ahead. So if I've got better performing people around me, obviously that's going to have a flow on effect for our business, but it's equally going to have a really beneficial spin off for the people who are actually able to tap into their potential and do their best work. And there's so much more enjoyment when we can do our best work. We look at balance. So, how balanced are we in our work and our life and our leisure? Because we know if we can show up as a balanced, authentic human, we're going to be a much better role model to those people around us. So, we have a look at that as well. Composure. So, under pressure, under high stress environments, when there's tension in relationships, how do we show up? How do we interact with people? Are we able to keep ourselves calm? Are we able to interact in a really positive way with people? And then are we committed to our own personal learning? So as humans, it is an ongoing learning journey. So are we actually committed to being better ourselves and continuing to learn? And so that all feeds into what we call the self-awareness dimension. Then sitting in the middle at the top of the circle is what we have called authenticity. That's what I said is very much the linchpin of leadership. And that's broken down into integrity. So do you walk the walk and talk the talk? Are you trustworthy as a leader? How do you show up? Can people rely on you to do what you say you're going to do in the timeframes? And then the other piece is around what we call courageous authenticity. And courageous authenticity is very much, are you able to bring up the undiscussables? Are you happy to have the conversations that are really hard to have? Or are you going to sit there and be quiet, not rock the boat? And we know when we get some real courageous authenticity going, we can actually start to have some of the good conversations that are going to move things forward in organizations.
Yeah. Unless you're too keen for some of that courageous authenticity and you're looking to have those conversations all the time at the drop of a hat,
It
which can
can,
be an
look,
issue
it
too.
can be,
Yeah.
and what we know is to be courageously authentic and for it to land well and in a way that's helpful is we need to have those strong relating dimension, that's strong behaviors in that relating dimension. So if we have a strong caring connection with someone, it is much easier to have that hard conversation. And Dr. Brene Brown talks about clear is kind and unclear is unkind or even cruel at times. So if we can form those caring connections with people, we can then have those conversations that say to them, "Hey, were you aware when you do X, Y, Z, this is the outcome, and it's not really serving you. It's not serving the organisation. How do we change that? So can I sit beside you and have that conversation with you?" And to be able to do that, you need to have that connection with someone. And without the connection, it's very hard to have the trust to be able to have those tough conversations. So that's why I say it's very much a linchpin. So if you've got that courageous authenticity and the caring connection, it's much easier to have those hard conversations.
Yeah, it really comes back to that, really call it caring deeply, right? So when you have that courageous authenticity, when you have that radical candor, I think is part of that, where you can actually say, "Hey, what you're doing isn't okay, but I'm telling you this because I want you to succeed. I want you to get ahead." And when you win, we all win. And how do I make that work? I don't always. I often tell the story when my boss was. I think he was jack of me doing something. I can't remember what I was doing exactly, but he basically said, "Look, you're not going to get ahead if you keep that particular type of behavior up. It's going to hold you back." And it was just the way he framed it, that he wanted me to get ahead. He wanted me to work. He wanted me to succeed in the role I was in and go into bigger and better things. But that was a blocker. And so it was a pretty blunt conversation, but it was framed in the right way. And I've really taken something from that. But the other thing with that process was, you initially see, so for me, shock horror, way perceived as being way more arrogant than I thought, way more ambitious than I thought, probably more candid than I thought. But then it's understanding, well, why are you doing that? And that's where your coaching comes in, right? You kind of get this objective assessment from your peers as to, you know, I guess, perception versus reality. And then you start digging into well, why? So run us through that. Like, how do you structure that sort of almost, for me, it's almost been like a counseling session monthly. From your perspective, how do you try and structure those conversations, and what form do they typically take?
Um, so as you know, part of the process that I go through is I actually go and interview people as well. So I go and get I gather more feedback to help you understand how people are perceiving you. So that's a really key part of the process for me, is to get more data, get more feedback from people. And so when I do that, I share that feedback with the person as part of that session, and it can be really confronting. But I think holding the space for someone to feel confronted and to stay with them, to be able to say, okay, maybe people do perceive me in that way, and that's not my intent. And why am I showing up in that way? And so a lot of the less effective behaviors that we see in leaders really come from our underlying beliefs and assumptions about ourselves. And so the underlying beliefs and assumptions we hold are mostly fear-based. So what's going to keep me safe? What's going to make people like me? What's going to help me be involved in the group? What's going to help me be successful? So all of these sort of behaviors that we have, and we tend to cement those behaviors very young in our lives, and as a way to keep us safe, really. And we're not talking about a conscious safety, right? But it's that very deep in our subconscious. And so part of that process is to really examine, what do you need to be kept safe from? What's going on for you? When these things happen, what's been triggered for you? And is your response helpful to you now? So it might have been helpful to you as a 11, 12, 13-year-old, but now you're an adult and you're in a work environment. Are these behaviors still going to serve you? Um, and really starting to unpack what's going on for people in that space. The other thing I try to get my clients to do is to journal. So once we get some awareness around some of the behaviours that we are demonstrating that aren't perhaps as effective as they could be, is to bring in a reflective practice at the end of each day, and spend 5 minutes with a journal and say, hey, when didn't I show up as my best self today? When did these behaviours come up? What was triggered for me? How did I feel? And really tap into, what's going on for us in our body. So we often feel our triggers in our body first. So it might show up as a quickening heartbeat, or a clammy hands, or a sick stomach feeling. So trying to get people to be really aware of what's going on in their body can actually help alert them to when they've been triggered. And then when they've been triggered, what was it that triggered us? And then why are we behaving in the way that we are? What are we trying to protect? And really unpacking whether that's still useful for us and whether we need it any longer.
I found that that process quite useful after someone would say or do something that I would find myself, as you said, kind of tensing up to, or immediately kind of getting my back up in some way without fully understanding why I'm doing it, and taking the time to actually sit down and sort of write down some lines, or even if you're not writing the lines down, but actually just putting some time aside to go, why am I feeling like this? What's driving these sort of this resentment or this anger? What's actually underlying that? I think that whole process for me, it was really interesting that over time I realized that it was almost like I'd come into Lightwire 5 years ago, and I almost was so driven to make my mark. It was part of the problem was I started seeing that I got ahead when other people didn't, that there was a finite amount of kudos to go around. And, you know, uh, it was very self serving and almost and outright probably detrimental to others, because I wouldn't look to help them get ahead. I'd look to get myself ahead. And that was, no one's going to follow that person. And it was through the process I went through with you and that 360 review process that, I understood how I was perceived. I saw where the problems were really being driven from, and the behaviors I could really focus on over time to really sort of bring that back. But I don't know how you find. Well, I'm obviously you can have some hopefully good insights here. But for me, when you're perceived as having certain behaviors, if you're looking to become a leader within an organization, but people see you a certain way, how hard is it to sort of turn that ship around, to kind of change people's opinions about how you operate and really what you are or who you are as a person?
It is a huge challenge. And I think it's about sustained change to behaviour so that people can start to trust and believe that they're going to get a different behaviour on a regular basis. And the hard thing for us as humans is if we do stumble backwards a little bit, then that reinforces that perhaps we haven't changed our behaviours. And so what I love about one-on-one leadership coaching is it sits along people for a sustained period of time. So, for you and I, we've been working together for well over probably about 18 months, maybe clicking into 2 years. And
That's how
so,
broken I
we
am.
can continue
I need more.
we can keep continuing to check in, right? And I think um, that sustained, deliberate practice to be able to change our behaviors is what's required. And that's why journaling is really important, to be able to sit down and understand and do over, to be able to go, yep, I got that wrong, let's do that over. And I think, as humans, we are imperfect and we are going to get it wrong. And part of this piece around authenticity is to be able to reflect and say, I got that really wrong. And then to be brave or courageous enough to go back to someone and say, hey, the other day I didn't show up as my best self. I got it wrong. I'm really sorry. Can we do that over? Can we work through that again? I want to show up as a better leader for you. Um, and I think if we can start to build that into our practice as well, then that will help to reinforce the fact that we are in fact changing, that we're self-aware, that we get it wrong, we're human, but we're willing to keep on working with it. And I think the more we do that, the more people's perceptions will start to change of us. And it is that sustained practice that will do it long term. And the same goes with organizational culture. Being able to turn organizational culture is a really slow process, and it takes sustained commitment to be able to do it, because people need to trust that it's going to stay that way, or those behaviors are going to be what they expect or what they want to see happen.
I think the problem too, right, is if you try and change it once and fail, the second time there's less buy-in because people have been in here and seen it before. Third time, my God, disaster. So you really have one solid shot at these things, whether it's the company culture or yourself. People tend to get less invested the more times you give it a crack. So yeah, really, you've got to want it.
But I think in not be too hard on yourself as well, because we are all going to get it wrong. And in times of high stress and high pressure, we're going to fall back to our reactive behaviors that are really grounded in our subconscious. And so not being unkind to ourselves about it. And I think the thing is to be able to go back and say, hey, I got it wrong, is the key to helping to change people's perceptions of us.
In your experience with that Leadership Circle 360 review process, how often or how common is it for you to actually come across someone who is actually pretty much sees themselves as everyone else sees them? They're pretty much on the money.
Very, very rare.
Okay. Makes me feel
Very,
better.
very
Good.
rare. It's very rare. And it can work both ways too, right? So we get the leader who thinks that they're hitting the mark and they're doing everything right, but it's not being felt or perceived by the people around them. And then we get the more humble leader who is really hard on themselves, and people are actually experiencing them in a much more positive way than they perceive themselves. So you sort of get both sides of it, but it's very rare to get them that people match with the perceptions.
So in that second example, where they don't see themselves what they really are in terms of what they're achieving and how they're perceived, what do you do to work with those people? What's the next step there?
The next step is really looking at where those gaps are and what's going on. And the key tends to sit in their underlying beliefs and assumptions about themselves. So what is it that they believe about themselves that's holding them back from believing that that's how they're actually showing up? So you can do some, you can have a lovely shift in people's confidence and their self-esteem by helping them to see how other people see them as well.
Okay. I guess something that I've gone through is when you do grow as a leader in an organization and you move out of the operational day to day and you move into a more strategic view, your idea of what success is can vary, right? So instead of going, I made this many sales this week or this month, or I hit my KPIs from a marketing perspective, whatever, instead of looking weekly, monthly, even quarterly, you end up looking, annually, 24 months out, 36 months out. You're making a smaller number of decisions that have arguably a much greater long-term impact, but aren't immediately obvious. How do you coach people or advise people to shift the way they see success in their role as leaders?
It is a challenge, and I think when people have their value is closely tied with very tangible results. Moving into a space where it's less tangible is a real challenge. And again, through reflection is, where have you made a difference today? What have you done well today? How is what you've done today going to make a long-term impact on the business? So actually getting people to change the way they think about how they're showing up in the workplace and what their contribution is. So the contribution changes, right, from being an individual contributor to being a leader. And so, how do you show that value, and how do you recognize the value that you're adding? And a lot of that comes back to self-awareness, comes back to reflection, and being able to see for yourself where you are actually making a difference. And as a leader, your difference could be, your interactions with an employee, helping an employee be their best selves. So celebrating the success of other people is adding huge value to your business, because that's going to then go on and have an impact on your business. So they're less obvious, tangible results, but it's actually looking and priming your brain to look for the value add that you're contributing to the organization.
That's fair. It was definitely a challenge for me, that particular one. And I think, yeah, when your results have been so clear, so tangible, I was just thinking as well, in the support space, if you're used to handling a certain amount of tickets, successes, certain metrics around, call wait times and tickets handled and response rates, etc. Yeah, moving to a point where you're like, right, we're moving towards, a certain metric over the next 3 years from a financial position, and we need to invest in new technology. As you test that and make these decisions, it's a lot less clear as to whether or not you've added value until much later down the track. So yeah, it's an interesting one. But I want to get a feel as well. How much do you put onus on the individuals to create a leadership path for themselves inside an organization, as opposed to it all being a top-down approach? Like, is there a middle ground? How do you see like the perfect situation playing? Is it that the person needs to have ambition and approach their leadership with a desire to get ahead and suggest some potential options, or do you see it as part of a skilled employee retention program that comes top down?
It's probably somewhere in the middle, Brendan. I think there is, for an individual, there's real value in having clarity around what it is you want to achieve and driving that, right? Making it impossible for your employer to ignore you. So being able to set your own pathway and striving through excellence to actually be noticed in your organization. But I think, on the flip side of that, the employers have to provide pathways for people to experience stretch assignments and have take on more responsibility. So it's probably somewhere in the middle, I think.
But like with the tech sector at the moment, skilled staff shortages everywhere. It's a bit of a mess out there. Have you seen companies getting smarter about the pathways they create for leaders within the organization?
I think the employers are getting smarter around how they attract people, full stop, on how they foster and create a culture where people can strive and thrive, I guess. And I think COVID's been in some ways a bit of a gift, because it's forced employers to look at the employment relationship differently, and to lean into what employees need and what they really tap into how to grow and retain and develop people as well in organizations. Um, so I think we're in the middle of a very big shift in business. I think businesses that are able to pivot and change and are agile are going to succeed in in the long term, right? And I think being able to keep your people engaged and take them on that journey is so important. And so there is a lot of pressure on employers at the moment to think about how they do this and how they do it well.
We've got the cadetship program that we've introduced with our knock, where they come on and over a 2-year period, they're exposed to different parts of the business, voice and systems and dev and other bits. Year 2, they pick a stream and then they go for that. And while that in itself isn't going to make them, uh, into management positions immediately, it certainly gives a pathway towards that. And I've found that we're not unique in having that kind of a process that seems to be being adopted in some form across a number of businesses. But I'm just curious as to whether or not you've seen any other particularly sort of smart, without mentioning names, measures put in place to both attract but also retain and give a sense of progression to people within businesses. That's so good. That's sad though,
So,
right? Like
and look, to be fair, I
that's
think because I do so much work in the professional services industry, they're still wedded to their old hierarchical structures, and
mm, mm,
there's not a lot of reason for them to change. So for those structures to change, it requires the people who are sitting at the top to give up their power.
mm.
And so why would they do that? What's the incentive for them?
That's true. That's interesting though, eh?
And I think, I think professional services really struggle with that because it has been set up on a very old school structure that is all about hierarchy and progression. And then,
So there we're talking about like the partner model kind of a concept too, right? Often, yeah. Okay, that's really interesting. So in a way, the tech sector is probably free of that sort of encumbrance. It's able to think more laterally and run with bigger and potentially better ideas. In in the tech space, do you think there's anything unique in terms of what makes an effective leader, or do you think there's just universal truths that apply across virtually all industries? You touched on that courageous authenticity, etc. But do you think just is the tech sector unique? Is there something special about those of us working in it that if we have certain skills, we can be more effective as leaders?
I'm a firm believer that leadership is universal. It's how you show up as a human. It's how you behave. It's how you interact with people. It's how you set direction. It's how you look at the whole of the organization, your systems awareness. For me, leadership is all about how you behave, and I think it doesn't matter what industry you're in. Um, Leadership
Mm,
is leadership. I do see more in the tech space that fast-paced leaders that can make quick decisions, which is quick and effective decisions, which is a leadership competency in itself, are going to do better. Being able to pivot, being agile, being able to um, manage uncertainty and huge amounts of change is always going to make you more effective as a leader. And I think we see that more in the tech space because by its very nature, it is much more fast-paced. Um, so I think you might see more leaders who are more agile and able to pivot more quickly in the tech space than perhaps in
mm.
more traditional um, professional service type environments.
I wonder if that actually leans itself to being prepared to take feedback more readily as well. Just kind of used to having to go, right, well, that didn't work, move on. Just kind of fail quickly, bullets and cannibals, all that kind of stuff.
Mm.
Probably
It's certainly
interesting.
in my experience that seems to ring true.
Okay. Well, good for us.
Yeah,
Look at
get
us
in
go in
there.
the tech sector there.
Mhm.
Uh, my thoughts there. I was just thinking about the 360 review process again, where you've got an owner operator outfit, you've got an MSP, say I don't know, 20 staff, 30 staff, and you try and go through a process like this with an owner operator who's wearing sort of head operational but also strategic responsibility. They go to a relatively small group of people and say, well, they don't, you do on their behalf, but say, what do you think of this person in regards to these specific attributes? Do you find people hold back a little when the pool of people the answers could have come from is a bit smaller?
I've never experienced it. So I
Okay.
find that the way I set it up is that we're wanting to support this leader to be the best leader that they can be. You know, the feedback will be given in it's fairly anonymous. I say fairly because sometimes people's voices still come through, right? And people can go, oh, I know who said that. But what I do through the process is it's not about trying to work out who said what. It's about actually looking at the feedback with curiosity and understanding why people might be saying that about us. And what I tend to find is there's a real generosity of spirit. People are wanting to help leaders to succeed. They're wanting to help people become the best versions of themselves. So most of the time, the feedback I get is really constructive and useful.
Okay, that's good. And I guess the other thing that the way that could go is if you have managers who are trying too hard to be everybody's friend, that's a negative too, right? Like, you can't be everything to everyone. You need to have goals and principles and still have a pretty grounded sense of self. So how do you walk that line? How do you get people to walk that line between, seeking to be somewhat validated by the way people see them, but at the same time not changing who you are to, well, I mean, not changing who you are. It's hard, isn't it? Because, sometimes you do need to change who you are if you suck. Like, it's kind of a balancing act. So how do you get people to find the right balance between making the right changes to how they operate and ultimately who they are, but not just desperately seeking to be liked by everyone?
Well, I think, desperately seeking to be liked by everyone comes back to a very primal need for us as humans to fit in, to be part of something bigger than ourselves. And, that comes back to human babies are the only species on the planet that can't survive without someone to care and love us, right? We need someone to feed us and keep us warm and all of those good things. But as adults, we don't need to be loved and we don't need to be part of a group to survive, right? But life is much better when you do have connection and you are part of a group. So, it's much richer and fuller and your life experience is all the more better for it. But we don't need it for survival. And I think what we do through the coaching process for people that have that I need to please others, to be liked by others, to fit in with others, is to really unpack where that's come from for them. And we usually find clues back in the early days of their lives where they've felt the need to fit in for whatever reason, whatever's going on in their life at that time. And we've created these behaviors that enable us to fit in with other people or to be liked. And it's really challenging. Are those behaviors not serving you? So in these scenarios in the workplace, is it serving you to be liked? So when you're sitting with your fellow executives at a table, actually falling in line with everyone and acting in a way so that they like you and you don't rock the boat, is that serving first you and the organization? Is that, is that a behavior that you actually need? And actually really pressing people on, do you have evidence of it? And, what's at risk for you if you aren't liked by someone? What's going to happen? What's the word? And actually going through that, what is at risk at you? What's the worst case scenario if you're not liked? And actually helping people to see things a little bit differently. And it can be so liberating to get rid of that need to be liked, that need to be part of the group. And that doesn't mean that we then go out there and start to, behave in a completely opposite way. But it's more about being able to be authentic again. I know that keeps coming up a lot, but when you have got something on your mind that you need to say, or there is a topic that needs to be surfaced, actually being brave enough to do that and not be concerned that people aren't going to like you because you've done it. And so that can be a really freeing experience. And I think what we find is people who have that really strong need to fit in and to be liked, they tend to make themselves a little bit smaller. So if I'm small, I'm not going to upset or aggravate or get offside with anyone. So if I live quite small or I show up in a small way, I'm not going to be offensive to anyone. And so being able to encourage people to actually step into who they are and to be their biggest, best self is actually quite a freeing thing for people to be able to do. It can be quite a cathartic thing.
So do you find then that a lot of, effective leaders are quite big personalities?
No, and some of the most introverted, quietest leaders can be really, really effective.
Okay. And
Often with big, loud personalities, the big loud can often be a front or a cover for other insecurities. So, I think we sort of think, oh, an extrovert's going to be a great leader, and an introvert's probably not going to be. But a lot of really great leaders are introverts. We refer to quiet leadership, so being able to really connect with people and show up and express yourself in a quiet and controlled way, but really share your story, share your vision, share your passion with people, can come from the most introverted of people.
So, I mean, I'm just asking for a friend, but if you were putting your face on all the marketing stuff that your business did and doing podcasts and videos and blogs and stuff all the time, that doesn't necessarily make you a great leader.
Doesn't necessarily
Right,
make you
okay,
a great
just
leader,
checking.
but it doesn't make you a poor leader either, right?
No, that's it. And I guess that's it. It's whatever you are, being genuine, authentic, and
Yeah.
consistent, I suppose, is a big part of it. I'm going to wrap up with a question I ask virtually every guest, because one day we're going to do a supercut of all the answers. But what one thing, in your view, if done well, does more to drive profitable growth is how I should frame that, than anything else for MSPs? And I guess for you, that relates to the leadership space. So what do you reckon?
I'd have to say highly effective leaders, right? They're gonna create an impact on your bottom line by having engaged, excited employees working in your business.
Yeah, I buy that, and I think we're a big fan of the scaling up framework at Lightwire,
Yeah.
and it all starts with getting the right people on the bus. And what more important people on that bus than the leaders? And you've got to invest in them, and you've got to invest in the next generation of leaders and leadership at all levels. It can't just be the exec, in my view. It's got to be the people who manage the important teams that are customer facing, and that's as much about ensuring the customer experience as it is about stability within the business. Well, I guess the two are really the same thing, because customer experience is improved when you've got consistency of people. You've got motivated people with a clear pathway to something bigger and better, and people know how to interact with one another. So yeah, maybe that's a good space.
Absolutely. And I think you touched on a really important point. Leaders are not just the people that hold the titles. You can have leaders right throughout your organization, and that's where you start to see some real value, when you allow people to lead without that title as well.
So I guess one last question for you then is, that process you go through with the review, is there a type of position from which that becomes relevant, or is it relevant really for virtually anyone?
So the leadership circle profile tends to be more for your senior leaders in an organisation. The leadership circle also offers a manager's edition, which is wonderful for team leaders, supervisors, emerging leaders, so people who aren't quite sitting in those senior leadership roles, but are working towards it or progressing into it. And I think that's a really nice way to get someone started when they're in that middle management phase of their career as well. And it's the same framework. It's a simplified framework, so it introduces people to the concepts of the full leadership circle profile.
Okay, great. If anyone listening wants to get in touch to talk about what they can do within their business to develop their leaders, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Send me an email. Give me a call.
Okay, cool. And that email is
Amanda@russo.co.nz.
cool. RUSSO for anyone
RUSSO, that's
Cool.
right.
Nailed it. Sweet. All right, Amanda, thank you very much for coming on. Great to chat as always. And we'll wrap it up there. Thanks.
Thank you, Brendan. Thank you so much.
All good. So that's it for this week. Thank you very much for listening. I have, as I said throughout the podcast, worked with Amanda for a long time now, and highly recommend the process that she works with, the Leadership Circles 360 review process. If anyone has any questions about how it works, my experience with it, always happy to talk. So just reach out either on LinkedIn or at brendan@insightsasaservice.fm. But that's it for this week. See you again soon. Thanks.